There you go. All good.
Good morning, everybody. Or sorry, good evening, everybody. Sorry, it's been that kind of crazy day. I apologize. Welcome to this evening's curriculum committee meeting. We're very happy to have all of you with us tonight. And this evening, at tonight's meeting, we're going to be focusing on two specific items. One, I'm going to give a very brief update here in just a couple of minutes about our virtual programs, how things are going to start the school year, at which time after that, I'll turn things over to Dr. Miner, who's going to talk about a core literacy resource and called Fountas and Pinnell Classroom and some information related to that. But by way of getting us started, I thought it would be helpful for everybody to have a bit of an update on how things are going virtually within the district. We're off to a fantastic start. We have an amazing team of individuals here, whether it's teachers, administrators, district folks, staff members, even parents. Everybody has worked together exceptionally well to start the school year off extremely well. I had reached out to our principals today to get some information regarding attendance, and our attendance numbers in the early going look really good. Lorraine, 97%, Jackson Wald, 96%, Rifton, 98%, Awatin Creek, 95%, the junior high school, 99%, and the senior high school, 94%. All of those numbers are fantastic. In speaking with our principals, they're all on par or higher than what they normally are if we're in the traditional setting, which is always a good sign. And we're working through some of the unique challenges that exist online with attendance, the biggest one being somebody may be present for the day, but may not necessarily show up for every single class in the schedule. And our principals are working through that. But we're thrilled with the attendance. I think what that indicates is that we've put a model together that not only accounts for all the needs of students, but also keeps equity in mind so that all of our students can be successful, regardless of the circumstances that they're dealing with. The other thing that I will mention that has been fantastic in the early going has been the community support that we've noticed. Dr. Miner and I continue to get very positive feedback from our community about this plan. I know the principals are hearing it as well. And I will also add that the constructive feedback that we've received has been really beneficial as well. It helps us to constantly be thinking about what we need to be looking at and how we can continue to make this the best education we possibly can. And we really feel like it positions us in a really good place that no matter what happens next with this pandemic, and as Dr. Miner is fond of saying, at 5:08 p.m. on Tuesday, September the 8th, I can tell you one thing, but an hour from now, it could be totally different. But based on where things are right now, we are in a great place for whatever the next step may be, whether that's a transition back into the building or whether it's a continuation of virtual. So we're very happy with how things are going. Great job on everybody's behalf, and everybody is working exceptionally hard. So it's been a wonderful start. At this time, I'd like to turn things over to Dr. Miner, who's going to talk to you a little bit about literacy in the district, some of her, one of her great passions, and also share some of her perceptions in the early goings and some thoughts that she has about what our next steps need to be. So, Dr. Miner.
Thank you, Dr. Winters. I would echo what you said. I couldn't be prouder of our students, of our staff, our teachers, our administrators, and our community right now. This has been certainly one of the most unusual openings to school I think most of us have ever experienced, but I think the quality that is being delivered is really impressive. And again, I want to echo what Dr. Winter said. We appreciate all of the support that we've been receiving from the community and the constructive feedback that we've gotten, and we've gotten that, and we've taken it seriously. We have several subcommittees that are working, and our goal is to continue to improve, get better each and every day. And I really can't thank everybody in Exeter for doing such a tremendous job in such a challenging time. So in order to keep doing good work, we have to keep evaluating what it is we're doing currently, how those things have worked historically, and what we think will work best in the future. So that is what my presentation this evening is about. So Mr. Calamita is going to assist me and present a PowerPoint show that I have for you tonight, and we'll walk through some slides and I'll tell you more about it. Mr. Calamita. All right, thank you. So the presentation this evening is about Fountas and Pinnell Classroom, as Dr. Winters mentioned. And Fountas and Pinnell, just to give you a little background, are two of the most prominent reading researchers in the world. They have been well known for a very long time in terms of creating something called the Fountas and Pinnell Benchmark Assessment System. You might have called it an F&P or a BAS. You might have heard your students be assigned a particular letter in terms of their reading level. That's all come out of the work of Fountas and Pinnell. And so they literally wrote the book on guided reading. They wrote a book called The Literacy Continuum that's foundational to what we know about teaching students how to read. And just recently, they decided to, in the last 2 years, get into the market of resources and provide classroom resources based on their years and years of research. So that's what I'm here to tell you more about this evening. Mr. Calamita, next slide, please. So one of the things that I wanted to first take a look at when I started at the district is where has Exeter been in terms of our objective data? So the easiest thing to get access to and the most prevalent in terms of comparing Exeter to other schools is the PSSA. As you know, there was no PSSA data from last spring due to the COVID-19 closures. So the most recent data that we have is 2018-2019 data. You can see in each of these graphs for our 3 elementary schools, the data farthest to your left is 2014-2015 data, and then it moves year by year until the dark blue column at the right, which is the 2018-2019, which is again the most recent PSSA data that we have access to. So you may be asking yourself, why is Dr. Miner showing us math data for a reading presentation? Well, one of the things that I heard frequently through my entry planning process in the pre-entry interviews was that people were very concerned with the math data in Exeter and how we were performing in math. And as you can see from this data, there are certainly concerns to be had. So you can see a 43% proficiency rate in Jackson Wald in 2018-19 for 3rd grade, a 52% proficiency rate in Lorraine, and a 56, I need my glasses, I think, percent rate at Watton Creek. If you would go to the next slide, Mr. Calamita, when I look at data, I don't look at it from this perspective in terms of the bar. What I'm interested in is what you can see here as the red bars. And the red bars represent the students who did not achieve proficiency. So it's not about having a negative perspective. It's simply about recognizing that that's the population of students who we haven't been successful with. And I like to really have our teams and me personally think about those students in terms of actual students. So if you lined up 100 students from Jackson Wald's 3rd grade in a gymnasium, you would have to pull out 57 of them who didn't achieve proficiency in math by 3rd grade, and likewise 48 at Lorraine and 42% at a Watton Creek. So I think it's logical for people to presume then that we would be looking at math programs right now. But if you would go to the next slide, Mr. Calamita. One of the things that I have found in my many years as a school administrator is the root of math problems aren't generally what we think of as math solutions. So they're not, we don't have a good enough math program, we don't spend enough time on math. It's the fact that math is comprehension, reading comprehension, understanding what the problem is asking you, plus computation. So this year we invested in the First in Math program, which will help our students with their math fact fluency. We have a conceptual math program to deal with computation, but what we really need to get after is comprehension if we're ever going to be successful with both our reading and our math data at the levels that we want to be successful, which is 100% proficiency. Our goal always needs to be that every student is being successful on these core basic skills in reading and math. So if you go to the next slide, please. This is an example of a PSSA item from the 3rd grade PSSA. And if you take a look at the example, I can read it to you for those who may be on a phone. It says, at a park, Calvin sees a total of 27 birds sitting in 3 trees. He sees the same number of birds in each tree. Which number sentence correctly shows how many birds Calvin sees in each tree? In order to solve that problem, you have to be able to decode it. You have to be able to read and understand what the words say, but then you also have to understand what the words mean. That's comprehension. You have to be able to read that and really understand what the question is asking of you. And if you don't understand that, your chances of selecting correctly below in terms of the number sentences is fairly slim. And we forget that. We forget that functional to understanding how to answer most math problems is understanding the question, which is ultimately a reading task. You have to be able to read it in order to solve the problem. So let's take a look and see what our reading data shows us on the next slide. And here again, I've done it the same way where you can see the data from 2014 through 2019, left to right. And you can see, although it's better than the math data, it's only marginally better than the math data. And it follows a pretty similar pattern, building for building, which again reinforces the idea that reading is fundamental to ultimate success in math. So if you go to the next slide, Mr. Calamita, you can see again, the number of students who haven't been successful in 2018-19 in terms of achieving reading proficiency on the PSSA. When we think about 2018-2019, of course, that was a year with no pandemic. There was no pandemic the prior year, and students had full access to the best of what Exeter had to offer. We know that last spring, schools closed. They closed abruptly. There wasn't sufficient programming in Exeter and other districts that we weren't prepared. Pre-Ks closed, so kids coming into kindergarten this year lost their spring experience, 1st grade, 2nd grade. So critical times in learning how to read were stunted by the closures due to the pandemic. So while this was our 18-19 data and we don't have 19-20, I think it's fair to assume that the data is probably in a worse position than it was prior to the pandemic due to the loss of instructional time. So this is kind of the best case scenario of 18-19. And I think we're all working from the assumption that the data is probably less favorable this year, given the closures. Next slide, please. So when you look at data, when I look at data, I'm looking at educational data in terms of telling me one of 3 stories. Is it telling me a student story? Is there an individual student whose data is an outlier to everyone else's data? In which case the solution is an intervention for that student, a reading intervention, a math intervention, some kind of specific special education intervention perhaps. But when a student's data is an outlier, it's a student issue. The second possibility, and in this case, we have so many students that it's not an individual student issue. The second possibility is that it's a teacher issue. When you see a single teacher whose data is an outlier to everyone else's, and the teacher seems to be struggling, that again, you can see in the data. And typically the rest of the teachers are being highly successful and you see one teacher who isn't. And the solution there is professional development, helping that teacher become more proficient at teaching that subject or that skill. Again, when you look at the numbers in 2018, 2019, and the previous years, it is too many students to be accounted for as a teacher problem. And we know that we have outstanding teachers who work extremely hard each and every day. So we have to rule out that it's a teacher problem in terms of where we are with our current data. So the final thing that we look at is it a system problem? Is it spread throughout 3 buildings in our case? Is it spread throughout multiple classrooms and multiple categories of students? And that is in fact what we find, is that in both math and reading, it's a system-wide issue where we're not getting the levels of proficiency that we need in order for future academic success. And so when you think about a system-wide problem, the system-wide problems can be problems of time, they can be problems of processes, structures, curriculum, or resources. In this case, we'll certainly continue to evaluate and likely adjust our time, processes, structures, and curriculum. But what we know for sure is that we have not invested in Exeter in the last 10 years or more in resources for early literacy. Again, our teachers do excellent work. We do some of the best practice activities that you would want to see in reading. Right now, we focus on a structure called balanced literacy that takes into account guided reading and different aspects from the literacy continuum. But our resources are lacking. We haven't invested in that space. So what I'm proposing tonight, and we'll be asking the board to vote on at the voting meeting, is an investment in resources. Next slide, please. So I wanted to share this slide because I think sometimes people aren't sure if you can really impact the data in significant ways. This is a slide, it's from when I was principal at Evergreen Elementary School. And my first year was that 2009 year there on the data. And what you can see is when we focused on our resources, our time, our structures, our processes really, really closely, both our math and our reading data went up quickly, incrementally, and then stayed at the top tier. So we were one of the highest performing schools in the state for multiple years, because once we achieved that systemically, it wasn't a student problem, it wasn't a teacher problem, it was a system problem. And when we worked out the kinks in those systems, we were able to achieve at nearly the 100% mark for multiple years. That extended throughout the rest of my tenure as principal and for many, many years beyond, because we corrected the systems issue. So I'm going to ask Mr. Calamita in the next slide to prepare to show a video, and I want to talk to you a little bit about that video as he prepares for it. Normally we would have a meeting in person. I would be able to show you the resources, talk through them, pass them around, etc. I'm not able to do that obviously tonight due to COVID-19 in the virtual environment. But last year at Upper Dublin, when I worked there as the chief organization officer, and prior to that as the director of elementary, we had a similar problem with our reading and math data. And we looked at many programs, and ultimately, and resources, we decided that we wanted to go with what was really the gold standard, which is the Fountas and Pinnell Classroom. That's the name of the program or the resources. And we piloted that in 17 classes throughout the district in grades K to 3. We then were going to either expand the pilot into grades 4 and 5 and through the other classrooms in K to 3, discontinue if teachers were dissatisfied. And we needed to make a decision by February. Well, in February, the teachers came back who had piloted and said that they were so overwhelmed by how positive the student reaction was to it, the teacher reaction, the quality of the materials, the quality of the instruction. Literally, I had a teacher say to me that it was life-changing in terms of, her excitedness about getting out of the car in the morning, and she'd never seen students be so enthusiastic and kids be so enthusiastic. And I saw this personally walking around in classrooms as well. So the teachers asked if they could make a video to convince our school board at Upper Dublin to not just continue the pilot, but to go with a full adoption of all of the Fountas and Pinnell classroom resources in grades K through 5. So because I can't be there and show you in person, I'm going to show you this video that the Upper Dublin teachers made last year that will give you a sense of why this has the potential to be a game changer for Exeter. So Mr. Calamita, if you could play the video, please.
25 years. We're curriculum scripted, less and less. And I feel like Fountas a really good teacher.
Mr. Calamita, I'm having issue with my sound. Is anyone else having a sound issue? Can we address the sound?
Yes.
Take a pause there while Mr. Calamita tries to change the sound settings.
Can everyone make? I think that's where we're getting our feedback from. All right.
Shared reading in the Fountas and Pinnell classroom is a key component of the reading program in the primary grades. And I love it because it's a chance for students to practice their reading behaviors in a warm and welcoming social experience.
The Fountas and Pinnell program has been a great addition to our classroom, and it provides a number of different sets of literature from which to teach.
We engage with an incredible book like these. There's such a wide variety of genres and characters and types of books.
It's just this fantastic collection of trade books. When we opened them this summer, it was like a birthday or a holiday because the titles in there were just amazing. Amazingly engaging, good stories that we would actually choose as teachers to teach anyways.
This is one of the books that's part of the shared reading component. It's a large print book that we use for a whole group lesson, and it also comes with 6 smaller versions if we want to ever go back to it.
They have a wide range of beautiful books that come with the series. And you can also supplement with other books. If you have your own favorites, you can get those and use those as well.
They love the humor in the stories, the illustrations and the photographs. They look forward to reading every day, which isn't always the case.
Another thing that I noticed about the program is that there's a really beautiful diversity that's represented in the stories. I found that it's a way for children to feel like they are represented in the literature, which I think has been missing from a lot of our programs in the past. For example, this book, One Leaf Rides the Wind, was part of a unit about counting, but through the story, we learned about Japanese culture, and it also inspired us to write some haiku poetry, which is how the book was written. They get to experience success with shared reading every time we do it, and they gradually share in the reading of a big book.
The phonics and word study program has been a really nice transition for the 3rd graders this year. They have a really strong foundation in phonics, which has been built through the Foundations program in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade. The way the phonics and word study program works is there's a short mini lesson, which is then followed by an application activity, which is usually a hands-on game, something that the kids do to manipulate words. They're putting words together, breaking words apart, thinking about similarities and differences between words, how adding parts and taking parts away from words changes the meaning. As the year has progressed, we've noticed that the kids have really become very confident and diverse in their strategies they use to attack words.
I've been teaching 2nd grade for a number of years now, and one of the things that my 2nd graders have struggled with in the past is being able to locate and name nonfiction text features like captions and sidebars and headings. And this year, since piloting the F&P classroom, I have kids waving their hands and saying, "Mrs. Hammerquist, did you notice that there's a sidebar in this book?" Or "I found a caption." It's really exciting to see that not only are they retaining it, that they're able to cross it over into their independent reading. And we're seeing a lot quicker mastery with that difficult skill.
They all come with this amazing guide that has ideas and questions in it that when I looked in there, it's things that we would probably want to do anyways. So that was refreshing that we weren't being told to do something that wasn't age appropriate or developmentally appropriate.
This is not a student material, it's a teacher material. It's our reading mini lessons book. And we have been finding that with this, our students are able to uncover such incredible, deep, meaningful thinking.
There are great skills and deep thinking that come from all of the lessons, but the teachers have a menu to choose from in regards to what text they use.
One of the great things about these big books is that the students can participate a lot with the reading. It has some great concepts of print that we can talk about, as well as pulling in some foundations work, which is our phonics program, so we can make a lot of connections to other parts of our language arts day. It's big print, and the kids are really engaged in it.
The thing that has impressed me most about the program are the anchor charts. Those anchor charts just make the teaching so much more explicit, and the students have responded so well. The anchor charts are teaching kids about what authors of fiction do, what authors of nonfiction do, more than just who's the main character and what's the problem and solution in the story, which is the basics that we used to teach kindergarten students. Now we're really looking at, wow, why did the author decide to write in that way? Or why did the author use that word instead of another word?
I feel that this series, in comparison to some of the others that I've used in my teaching career, just affords me an amazing amount of freedom to meet my children's needs.
We're looking at the craft of writing, and I just think it's so cool that as young as kindergarten, kids can really begin to appreciate what authors and illustrators do, and they refer to those anchor charts all the time.
The shared read, the guided reading, and the poetry sets are all equally amazing, engaging. The children love the titles.
So it's been a pleasure piloting Fontes and Pinnell this year. I've been really excited by how engaging the lessons are.
This program has allowed them to really enhance the skills that they've learned in the past 3 years with how words work, but then think about words even more deeply as they're encountering more complex words in both their reading and their writing.
It's such beautiful, high quality literature. And so many times when we introduce a new book, the children have already read the book or are familiar with the author or illustrator. So it's very engaging, and the stories are really appropriate for the children and really gets them thinking about higher level things.
When I'm reading books that are similar to other books we've read, they're making these connections that in prior years kids just weren't making. So I'm really happy with the program, and I can't wait to continue with it.
It's definitely worth continuing. It's a nice cohesive program with authentic literature. Let's use it.
Thank you, Mrs. Kelsey. That's going to turn to the slide. So there was an example of some of the Upper Dublin teachers' experiences. Why we are looking at this right now and the particular timing is that through the ESSER grant, which I'll talk to you about in just a moment, we have the opportunity to have access to grant funds to support some of the deficits that are encountered or have been encountered through COVID-19. So one of the things that is most exciting is the access that our teachers will have to all of these books virtually. One of the biggest challenges in a virtual environment, especially teaching literacy, is how do we get books and a variety of books out to students? What you're looking at right now is a screenshot of the virtual teacher page. And what you can see here, and it goes on and on and on, but I couldn't put it all in the presentation, is that teachers can choose any book from level A to level Z, with hundreds of titles, all different genres: fiction, nonfiction, poetry, subgenres, realistic fiction, etc. And they can really select the books that are right for the children in front of them, albeit virtually. So by making this purchase, what will happen is that when we come back to the brick and mortar setting, we'll have fully built out guided reading, book rooms full of books, which is what you ultimately need to have students be successful readers at all of the levels that our students need, as well as classroom teaching materials, which are called shared reading materials, that will be available for teachers, again, in that brick and mortar setting. Those big books that you saw, those little books, all of those tangible books will be present whenever we return to brick and mortar. And in the meantime, the teachers have total access to those exact same books, lesson cards, and resources virtually and at the tip of their fingers. So they can select whatever topic, whatever level book that they need, present that to their students over the computer. And then when they come back into the classroom, they'll be familiar with those titles, familiar with those authors, familiar with those structures, and be able to pick right up out of the brick and mortar and use those books. Next slide, please. So this is what it would look like in terms of a teacher sharing a cover. This is a cover of a book called Me. Again, you can see that the books are representative and inclusive. You see students of all kinds of backgrounds, which is something that historically has been lacking in programs in Exeter and in all schools, frankly. The next slide, you can see what an interior of the book would look like. And again, you can see that they're beautifully illustrated. The text is exactly what a student needs at a particular level. So at this particular reading level, students are introduced to dialogue. You can see dialogue. The font is a certain size, the number of words per page. So they're really designed to hit a student in terms of what they need in that moment to progress with their reading and be extremely engaging. This particular story is a classic that you might have read when you were a child about the mouse and the lion, and the mouse helps a lion get a thorn out of their paw. So they're classic pieces of children's literature, fables, etc., as part of this, in addition to brand new stories and titles. Next slide, please. This is the guided reading card. So with every single book in both the shared reading and the guided reading, again, when teachers are in the brick and mortar setting, they have these tangible cards where Faunus and Pinnell have gone through and make all kinds of like coaching suggestions. It's like a teacher having professional development right there with them in terms of what they could do with the text, how they could read it, how they could introduce it. Teachers don't have to follow any kind of a script. So veteran teachers may look over this and refresh themselves, choose some ideas that they haven't tried before. A novice teacher, a substitute teacher, a teacher who reading isn't their forte can really dive in and use all of these suggestions. You can see in this particular screenshot, there's always a how to support English language learners included in this. And so those cards are, again, available to the teacher for every title virtually as well as in the brick and mortar setting. Next slide, please. So in terms of the cost, it's not an inexpensive resource. We're only looking this year at purchasing 2 of the aspects of the program, the guided reading and the shared. There are other parts of the program, including interactive read aloud, book clubs, etc., that in future years, if this goes as well as I think, we'll be likely to come back to the board and ask to adopt those additional pieces of the program. But for right now, because they're available virtually and because they get after the most critical skills that we need right now in terms of our data, we have the opportunity to use the ESSER grant, which is the Elementary and Secondary School Emergency Relief Funds that schools were awarded as part of COVID-19 relief, as long as, in addition to, the Ready to Learn grant money that schools get every year from the state block grant, and that provides resources to schools that you can use in a variety of ways. We've historically used them to fund all kinds of different programs, and there's money available in our Ready to Learn this year to make up the difference over the ESSER funds. In the next slide, we'll talk about how we're using our grant funds in general, just to give you that perspective. So there are 2 categories of grants that we have access to right now. We have the ESSER grant and we have the Safety and Security grant. Those 2 grants combined total over $730,000, and they're both designed to support schools through the pandemic. So the Safety and Security grant, that money is being utilized and has been already utilized to purchase PPE, protective equipment, face shields, masks, hand sanitizer, cleaning supplies, alternate furniture for social distancing, etc. So we're using the Safety and Security grant to make sure that when we do return to brick and mortar, we have all of those supplies that we will need to keep us socially distant, masked, and hand sanitized, hygiene, cleaning supplies for buses, classrooms, etc. We've also used a portion of that grant money for document cameras, hotspots, Zoom licensing, computer monitors, and other types of hardware. And then we've reserved a portion of it for some contracted services. For instance, there's some talk about the potential of rapid testing in schools, and if we would need additional contracted services to do something like that, we've set aside a portion of the money for that. Then the ESSER grant money, so you can see SSG, they're coded for those things that were safety and security. The ESSER grant money, $100,000 of it have been expended for various virtual, traditional and hybrid environment programs like First in Math, like Reading Eggs, like Screencastify, tools that teachers are using right now in the virtual environment, and they'll be able to continue to use in brick and mortar. You can see about $40,000 for additional manipulatives and supplies so that students don't have to share those. Typically, we do a lot of sharing in schools, and we want to avoid that, so we don't have high touch tools and supplies in the classroom. So that money is being allocated towards that. And then you can see the bulk of that money, the $200,000, is what we're proposing we use to purchase the Fountas and Pinnell resource, again, to get us through both however long we're in virtual and then ultimately back in the classroom setting. And we anticipate that these resources will be, the resource that we'll need between 5 and 10 years out into the future. They're very high quality. They're very well constructed. And so this is a long-term purchase. It's not just simply a COVID-19 purchase. So one of the things that we're trying to do is really utilize these funds, not just to get through the immediate crisis, but to invest in things that in the long term will benefit our students. And we believe that this is one of those critical things. Next slide, please. So that concludes the PowerPoint presentation this evening. Mr. Calamita, if you can close that out, I would be happy to take questions from the committee. Or Dr. McClendon has joined us. So perhaps she'd like to take questions.
I have two, but I'm not on the committee, so why don't I let the committee members go first?
I just want to clarify, what grades are we using these materials for?
K to 4.
K to 4, okay. And also, I just wanted to throw out a comment there as well. If I believe you said in the beginning, but we already use the Fountas and Pinnell for intervention, and we also use the Fountas and Pinnell for assessments. So I feel this is a really great fit to also then use it with all of our students.
Thank you for that, Mrs. Wilson. You're absolutely right. One of the goals and one of the ways that you achieve that system improvement that I talked about at the beginning is by having cohesion and a comprehensive program that makes sense across environments. So you're absolutely right. We use the assessments currently. We use the leveled literacy intervention for our struggling readers, and for readers to be able through the classroom, through an intervention, and then ultimately to be assessed using the same language makes a tremendous amount of difference. And it goes towards that idea of system cohesion. So thank you for mentioning that.
I just want to thank you, Dr. Miner, for the presentation. I apologize for missing the very beginning of it, but I talked to Dr. Winters about the program, a couple weeks ago, and I had a lot of questions then, which he answered, and you very nicely addressed in your presentation. I like the way that you really tied in the math, because that was one of the questions I said. Well, our math scores are lower than our reading. Why are we purchasing reading? So you very nicely tied that in with how math problems, have evolved over the years, and they do need a lot of comprehension. And the last thing I want to say is I got copies of a number of the trade books and also the teachers, the guided manual. And I am really impressed. I was skeptical because of the $200,000 purchase. But once I started looking at that, I was really impressed. I think this is going to be an excellent resource for our teachers and for the students. I like, as you know, we have the Equity and Diversity Committee. And that was one of our goals is to take a look at curriculum and making sure that our curriculum is diverse. And these books that the students are going to be reading really do address that. So I'm all in, support for this. So thank you.
Thank you, Dr. McClendon. I'm glad you're able to see that.
Dr. Miner, I just had a question about professional development, getting staff prepared for the implementation of the program. What's your timeline? What do teachers need to get prepared to implement this?
Well, Dr. Hemberger, what's nice is right now we're looking at, fundamentally resources. So our teachers are already engaged in guided reading. That's a common practice in the district. It's a district that they've been supported in the years past through professional development. And those cards in particular, really, like I said, will refresh people. I think it's job embedded coaching in the truest sense. Every time you open a book, Fountas and Pinnell are kind of right there in those cards speaking to you about what you can do. The shared reading as well as part of our balanced literacy. That's something that teachers are accustomed to doing. You read a book, the kids engage in reading it with you. I think as the resources roll out and we're kind of out of the virtual setting, it'll be easier for me to go and do walkthroughs with our literacy team, with Melissa Devlin, with Patrick Winters, with Karen, D'Annunzio, and really get into classrooms and see how they're being utilized and what next steps in terms of professional development. I feel like we have the foundational professional development. We have the history in this kind of framework that we're talking about. And then ultimately, of course, we'll get feedback from teachers in terms of do they need additional support. So Heinemann is the company that Fountas and Pinnell are working with. They have excellent PD. I've used their PD for the last 15 years in all the districts I've worked in. And so if we decide that there are specific aspects of the program that we need more help or support with to really get the full benefit of the program, we can certainly draw that in. But in terms of a starting point, I'm comfortable that our teachers are well prepared to jump right in with this based on what they've done historically.
Okay. And does this come with computer type resources, or is it strictly paper product and books?
From a student standpoint, it is really about books. It is really about getting books in students' hands, beautiful color books. Historically, and I know Tiff Mel is on this call, and some others, we've had to do a lot of black and white, photocopy type of books. I know we've had some conversation about what are we copying all the time. A lot of it was resources. So to really get kids engaged in reading and loving reading and time on task, these beautiful books are there. So the technology resources are really teacher resources. So there's things that teachers can really dive into in terms of assessments. They can print those assessments. They can do research on the books, those sorts of things. But primarily the cost, the $200,000, is about the number of books. And in fact, if you look at the PO, which I would bring forward to the voting meeting, you can see that the kindergarten materials are a lot more expensive than the fourth grade materials. And the first grade materials are very expensive. And that's because students quickly go through books. So they learn, one word books and then 2 word books. And then older kids have fewer books, but they're longer. So it's really, the purchase price is about the volume of actual books that you're getting in this process. So what happened last year was school districts like Upper Dublin, other schools that have really made this gold standard investment, had spent, hundreds of thousands of dollars. And then when we were thrown into the virtual environment, had completely lost access to that. And so Fountas and Pinnell, and through their company Heinemann, they quickly scrambled to get those resources that I showed you, that virtual access to all of the titles, the PDFs of all of the titles. That wasn't originally part of the program. It was in response to the pandemic and making sure that these beautiful books that schools had invested in could continue to be accessed through virtual learning. So now it is all available virtually. That is what we're doing, but that's not really the intention. And the cost hasn't changed as a result. They've just given schools access to what they would normally have in a brick and mortar setting.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Mr. Fiedler, I know you had some questions.
Yes, Jackson-Wald had the worst scores. Do you have any idea why?
I haven't been here long enough to do a deep assessment. Jackson-Wald and Lorraine are our Title I buildings. Typically, the way that Title I is funded is based on free and reduced lunch. And that is because there's an expectation that schools with a higher level of poverty tend to have a higher level of reading difficulties for a variety of reasons. And so I anticipate that a portion of that can be explained through that. I'm certain that there are other underlying reasons, but I haven't been here long enough to really, spell out what they all are. Perhaps someone else on the call, has more insight in that regard. Dr. Winters or Ms. Devlin, I don't know if you have anything to add beyond the potential of the Title I status of the building. Best guess.
Yeah, that would be my best estimation as well.
Would there be any way at some future point for somebody to dive into that and get back to the board to explain that?
I would be perfectly honest with you, Mr. Fiedler, it's very difficult to do a historical analysis and get to root cause of something like that. For instance, there's been change in leadership, there's change in teaching staff, there's change in demographics. There's a lot of changes over time. What I would be more comfortable committing to, because I'm certain that we could execute on it, is to give you data as we move forward in terms of where the 3 schools began at the beginning of this process, how they move through the year and over the course of years, and whether or not we're able to really level out those gaps. Because one of the reasons that schools are Title I funded is that schools are supposed to use those funds to make up for those inherent gaps. And so ultimately what you should be able to see is that 3 schools, despite having different demographics, have similar levels of academic success. So I don't think we're going to be able to come up with a better response for you in terms of root cause analysis beyond just saying for 5 years this has been the case. But moving forward, we can continue to bring data to the board to talk about how things are going.
Right. And that's what was confusing to me, because you said it was a systemic issue. And it strikes me, based on my 9 months with the board, that if it's systemic, then all, as you just said, all the scores would be, say, within 5 percentage points, but the gaps are larger than that. So I come from a background, several backgrounds, where doing a root cause analysis was everything. But until you understood what the root cause was, you couldn't move forward. So if a valve leaked in a plant, you couldn't just fix the valve. You had to take the valve apart and figure out why the valve failed. And maybe the problem wasn't even in the valve. The problem might have been downstream from the valve. Water flow, pressure, substances in the water, dozens of possible causes. So that's the nature of my question.
A couple of things about that. Number one, Jackson Wall has a smaller population of students. So one of the things that we think about when we look at student data is, if you have 100 students across the grade level band, each student accounts for 1% of your total score, right? So if you have, fewer students, if you have, 75, each student becomes worth more than 1%. So another factor is a smaller student population is hit harder by any number of students who have a difficulty. So sometimes that data can be skewed in that regard. In terms of the root cause analysis, again, and the reason that I'm confident saying it's a systems problem, although our goal will be, for however long I'm superintendent, will be 100%, because I think it's inappropriate to have a goal that says that you're comfortable with any student not being successful. Where would I anticipate a district like Exeter performing would be around the low 90s across all 3 buildings. And so when I say a systemic problem, I'm saying that we're all way off the mark. There's certainly variability within the 3 buildings, but I think they're all much lower than they should be, given what I know about the quality of the teaching staff, the quality of the leadership, the quality of the community in terms of its commitment to our schools. So looking at a root cause analysis, I would say the fact that we don't have a quality resource and haven't invested, to kind of use your analogy, is like we don't have the valve. We don't have the fundamental piece. It's not, you don't have to look very far down to say, you can't do the work at the level that we have to do it in the complexity when you fundamentally don't have the tools. And we just fundamentally don't have the tools. And so I think I'm very comfortable, and I wouldn't be coming forward to the board with an expenditure like this if I didn't think that this accounts for at least a big chunk of the issues. Will we uncover more issues as we get out and use the resource? Might we see individual teachers who have varying levels of success? Will we see students who have varying levels of success? We will, but right now, we just simply don't have the tools that we need for anybody, no matter how talented or hardworking they are, to really get reading instruction done at the level that 2020 standards demand. And those standards have gone up tremendously. When you think about how you learn to read or how I learned to read, I have a picture in my office taken from one of those giant books that was Dick and Jane, and it was okay if, a certain percentage of kids didn't learn how to read, and everybody just took that for, that is what it is. Now we know that that's the key to all future success in school and in life. And the bar is much, much higher. And to reach that bar without the fundamental tools, I just don't think it can be done. I've never seen it done anywhere. And I would say that, Exeter being so far off of what I would anticipate across all 3 schools, I feel very comfortable, after really devoting 15 years of my professional life to this particular topic, that that's a fundamental reason that it's happening.
Okay.
It might not be the whole reason, but
I just want to say that how refreshing it is to hear you attack this problem. In the year that I spent in 2019, I got to most of the board meetings. I got to 10 of the 12, and I've been on the board for 9. And I have to tell you, and I'm disturbed to have to say this, but I haven't heard anybody address this problem the way you've done, and you've been here, 2 months? So I hope we can all, board, staff, teachers, administrators, even parents, take a look at what can be done. If you look under the right rocks, you can find things. And sometimes you don't even have to look under rocks. You just look at the numbers. And I've been hearing about bad numbers here since October of 2018, when I came to my first community forum. And that's when I first learned about kids' math scores under 40%. It was frightening. And that's one of the reasons I ran for this seat on the board. So congratulations. And in 2 months, you've done what nobody else has done over the past 2 years. So keep up the good work.
Well, thank you, Mr. Fiddler. And I do want to say, again, I wouldn't be putting forward, such a big expenditure so early in my tenure here if I wasn't completely confident in the ability of our teachers and the hard work that they do and the dedication and our leadership, our parent, like all of the other pieces, I really believe are just here in Exeter, and they're just waiting for the right tools to get the job done. And so I'm very confident that we'll see. It's not the whole picture. I'm going to come back and ask for other pieces. I promise you, I'm going to come back and talk about PD. This isn't the last time I'm going to come to the board and say we need money to do things, but this is going to be a huge step in the right direction. And I will be thrilled to share with the board regular updates on the progress that we make, because I'm confident that it will come, and it will come quickly.
Well, that's great. I mean, if we can spend $650,000 to resurface a track, we can certainly spend $200,000 to help our kids read.
Thank you.
I agree, John. And that's exactly was my point, was this is where we need to be putting our money to make our students successful in reading and math. This is where we need to put our money. And also, I just wanted to add one thing about the math PSSA, and this probably isn't for anybody on this call, but anybody watching. Those questions that, like the Kim that the example that she gave, Dr. Miner gave, that's all of the questions from math on the PSSA. And also, if you notice, they didn't really even ask like to solve the problem. I mean, you had to solve the problem, but they gave you the answer. So kids, they're not the ones that might be like have a strength in actually computation. They gave you the answer. You had to read and understand what was their question. So, and all of the questions are like that. I mean, I think when we used to take tests, it used to be like the first 10 were just do like the math, and then 11 and 12 were like a little bit of the the wordy questions. So if you got those wrong, you still did really well. But now they're all like that. So that's how we had to prepare our students.
That's exactly right, Mrs. Wilson. And I think your point is so well taken that the answer is there. So really knowing it doesn't have any bearing if you don't understand what the question is asking you. And, and that's one third grade example. You can imagine how that just continues to accelerate through fourth, fifth, and beyond in terms of the complexity of the comprehension needs that you have to have. All right, that's the end of my presentation, Dr. McClendon, if there are no other questions.
Now, I might have missed it, but we saw the video of the other teachers from some other districts, but also our teachers looked at it as well and had some feedback. Did you already talk about that?
No, I haven't. Thank you for mentioning it. So part of, again, we're in unusual times. This is an unusual circumstance. And so, this is a process that's happening more quickly than it typically would. And so one of my goals was to reach out and have a conversation with all of our teachers at the K-4 level. So I spent a good portion of last week meeting with teachers at every grade band, going over the resources, getting feedback from teachers. I received a number of emails as well as comments. I know Tiffany Mell, I think, is still on the call. I'm not sure if she's still there, but she was one of the teachers. I don't know if she wants to speak to that. She's in her car. Tiffany, do you want to say anything about that?
I'm in my car, but I'm here.
You might need to turn off your
yeah. I told Dr. Miner, she had me from the get-go. This is just, am I okay? Sorry,
I think, just try it without your video, Tiffany, and see if you can.
Okay, sorry. Yeah, my connection's not that great, but I was just going to say, anything with Fontes and Pinnell on it, anything, that we can use as a resource. She had me from the get-go. Like, as soon as she said, I'd like to get us this resource, I was all for it. So we appreciate the opportunity to use those materials and to also look at more materials in the future from Fontes and Pinnell as well.
Thank you, Tiffany. So that was, the feedback that I got from the teachers that I spoke to is that, we've been waiting for these. We need something like this. We're so excited to have this opportunity. Again, I don't know, Mrs. Devlin or Dr. Winters, if you want to say anything else about feedback. You were in all those calls as well.
Yeah, overwhelmingly, the general consensus from teachers is, when can I get it? Can you buy it tomorrow? Like that. I mean, our folks are chomping at the bit. I mean, they want it. They're eager for it. The great thing about balanced literacy is the framework is already in place. This resource will be a game changer for our folks in terms of how they teach literacy. So they're overwhelmingly in all the meetings, and we met with K through 4 reading and intervention specialists, administrators. Everybody is just thrilled beyond measure that we're able to move forward with this.
And I, Dr. Holler and Mr. Isselman are on the call as well. I didn't see their photos, so I forgot they were there for a minute. So I don't know if they wanted to add any thoughts, having been a part of literacy in the district and participating in those meetings.
Yeah, I just want to say from a historical perspective, we couldn't be more thrilled that Dr. Miner's bringing in this product. As Allison mentioned, we've been doing balanced literacy for a number of years. Julie Klein brought in Fontes and Pinnell. We lovingly refer to it as F&Ping kids, but we were just really did not have the resources. And as was shared, we were photocopying A to Z readers. We were trying to pull together all different things to support our students at various levels. So this is very exciting. And when Dr. Miner shared this with us, we all agreed that the teachers would be thrilled to get this in their hands and start to use it immediately.
I would just add too, I think Tiff really nicely summarized all of the teachers' reactions. Christy and I were able to sit in the meetings with Kim and with Patrick for the presentations, and overwhelmingly support from the teachers to get started with this if the board does agree to approve it. And I know Christy, Renee, and I are feeling that same excitement as well.
So just to clarify, in terms of next steps, if Dr. McClendon, you choose to move this item on from this meeting, then the purchase orders would be on the board voting meeting on the 15th for board approval. If we were to obtain board approval, we would order it immediately and try to get those resources into teachers' hands, within the next 2 weeks after that meeting.
Well, I definitely feel we should move it forward. I haven't taught for a long time, but just looking over these books, and it, made me excited for the teachers to be able to have these resources. So I really see the value in it, and I'm glad I took a look at it because I can fully support that. And I think we should take it to the board. I heard some other board members on here also saying that they support it too, so.
Thank you.
Is that it? Does that conclude our meeting then, or does anybody else have anything to share?
No, I think we're good.
Okay.
Yeah, I think we have an executive session right now coming up soon. So.
Is that right now at 6 o'clock?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, yeah,
We
we
need to
better
adjourn
say goodbye for this
We need to
meeting.
adjourn this one, yeah.
All right.
Thank
All
you,
right,
everyone.
Thank you, everybody. See you
Have
in
a
a
great
bit.
evening.
Thank you.